What is the number one thing that would improve your running, your walking, your hiking that you will probably never do? Well, we're going to tell you what that is and hopefully talk you into doing something about that on today's episode of The Movement, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body, starting feet first typically, because, those things are your foundation. And here we break down the propaganda, the mythology, sometimes the flat out lies you've been told about what it takes to run or walk or hike or do yoga or CrossFit or just play with your kids, whatever it is you like to do. And to do that effectively and enjoyably and efficiently. And did I say enjoyably? I know I did. That was a trick question. Because look, if you're not having fun, do something different till you are, because you're not going to keep it up if you're not having fun anyway. I'm Steven Sashen from ZeroShoes.com, your host of the Movement podcast. And we call it that because we're creating a movement that involves you. And I'll tell you how in a second. It's easy. About natural movement. We're helping people rediscover that using your body naturally is the better, obvious, healthy choice, the same way we think of natural food. So the movement part that involves you is we're creating this grassroots groundswell of people who have this experience, and it's been life-changing. And all you have to do is spread the word. So go check out our website, www.jointhemovement.com. There's no cost to join. You don't have to do anything other than if you want to subscribe to hear about upcoming episodes, find all the previous episodes, and all the places you can interact with us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, et cetera, all the places that you find podcasts. Leave reviews, give us a thumbs up on Facebook, hit the bell icon and subscribe on YouTube. You know what to do. In short, if you want to be part of the tribe, please subscribe. That kind of covers it. And I think I nailed everything. So, Jason, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you tell people who the hell you are and what you're doing here?
Thanks, Steven. Yeah, I'm here first and foremost because you invited me and I could not say no to you. But
well, look, cause and effect is very confusing for some people. So, but I appreciate that. And look, let's back up with, had we known that we were practically neighbors earlier, this would have happened sooner, but we just figured that out. In fact, I discovered you sort of late into the history or evolution of Zero Shoes, of something I was massively embarrassed by, if I actually got embarrassed, which I don't. But, the internet is so vast that people who could be your literal neighbor, you don't find them until sometime way down the line when you stumble upon them on Facebook or LinkedIn or something. So happy that you responded when I invited you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. And yeah, it's crazy that we're probably about 15 miles away from each other right now. And hopefully soon we can maybe do a round 2 in person, because that would be so fun. But I'm excited to be here. I'm Jason. I'm a running coach. I've been running myself since 1998. I was one of those kids who showed up to cross-country practice wearing long mesh shorts and basketball shoes, thinking that I was going to do the high jump. And then I quickly learned that cross-country is all running all the time. But I fell in love with it, like a lot of runners who I think start experiencing a little bit of progress. They start improving. They start getting a little bit better. And for me, that was very addicting. And so that really started this lifelong love affair with running. I went on to give up my love of basketball. I also stopped growing after 8th grade. I'm at a towering 5'7". So,
oh, well, dude, you got me beat by 2 inches. So stop bragging.
So I had to give up basketball, but I never looked back because I simply loved cross-country indoor track. I did it for all 4 years of high school and college and never stopped after I graduated. And I always knew that I wanted to somehow be involved in the running community because it was just such a big part of my life. My wife is someone who I met on the women's cross-country team when we were in college. My best man was my co-captain from high school cross country. And so my life has really been shaped by this sport. I wanted to be involved with it for the better part of the rest of my life. And in 2010, I started the strength running blog. And since then, it's grown to be just such an amazing resource for runners, but also creative outlet for myself. The Strength Running podcast was something that we started back in 2016, and that has become, I think, the number 2 running podcast of all time here in the US. Yes. So that is something I'm very much proud of. And I think the highlight of my day is just being able to interact with runners and folks who love running and who want to make running more accessible to everyone else. And I just couldn't think of anything better to be doing with my time than helping runners accomplish their goals. So I'm a coach, I'm a content creator. I help runners accomplish whatever goals that they might have through coaching, through different training programs that we have and through these types of conversations. So, Steven, thanks so much.
Well, A, again, you're welcome. And B, so let's jump straight in since you've already kind of hinted at what I already hinted at. The number one thing that consistently research shows improves people's running is getting stronger, spending some time in the weight room, or not necessarily in the weight room, but doing things to get stronger. And it's the number one thing that runners, especially runners who have a daily running habit, are the least likely to do. So talk about just how you discovered or how you sort of moved from just, say, running coaching into dealing with the strength aspect of that.
Well, I was someone who, just personally, as a runner myself, I was someone who thought that runners didn't have to do any strength training. And, you think about it, we're running around all the time. We're doing hill workouts. We're doing fast workouts. My legs are pretty strong, right? Why would I need to do any kind of strength work? And after about 1,700 injuries, I realized that maybe that wasn't the best course of action. And after my first marathon in 2008, I ran the New York City Marathon. And as I was getting back into running after that marathon, I got this IT band syndrome injury, and I had it for 6 months. And it was really that inflection point that caused me to really think, I need to revamp my training. I need to approach things differently. I need to just totally rethink how I approach running because, it's not just the IT band syndrome. I had that in college. I was the plantar fasciitis. It was the Achilles tendinopathy, the SI joint problems in my back, all kinds of muscle strains, pretty much every running injury I've had it. And a lot of those problems were because I wasn't really implementing much strength training in my program.
Well,
and so
pause right there.
Sure.
How did you even come to that conclusion that was perhaps a cause of the various problems you were having?
Kind of two reasons. Reason number one is that every time I got hurt, I would go to the physical therapist. And part of that therapy was various types of strength training. And so, sometimes you have to learn things the hard way, like 6 or 7 times. That is part of the big reason why it finally clicked for me. Hey, if I'm doing all the strength training to get healthy from this injury, what if I just kept on doing it when I am healthy to prevent it from coming back in the future? So it was very much kind of this obvious, but maybe only in hindsight, conclusion that I came to. And then the other reason why I started this, just incorporating a lot more strength training into my own running program, was that, well, I didn't really see much downside to it. And so I was like, let me try this. We're doing it a lot in the PT's office. It's not going to take much more time. Let's maybe divvy up an hour and a half over the course of the week for different types of strength training. And let's see what happens. And I've really only gotten one major injury since, about 2009. And it's made a big difference in my running. And it's made a big difference, I think, more importantly, in my coaching and how I interact with other runners. Because now I'm not the coach who doesn't think you have to do any strength training. I'm kind of known as the coach that is definitely going to make you do some strength training. Because, if we're talking about injuries, strength training is probably your number 2 most effective way of preventing injuries. And the first one is obviously just making sure your training is sound. Well, let's not run way too much or anything like that. The
first one is just sitting on the couch.
Right. Which we wrapped into poor training, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny, you just reminded me after I got back into sprinting and I was getting injured pretty much constantly, I hooked up with this one sprinting coach who said, well, how much can you deadlift? And at the time I said, I don't know. And I went and tried and I did like 250 pounds. He goes, what do you weigh? I said, 150. He goes, call me when you're deadlifting over 300, because you're going to find that most of your problems are going to go away once you're deadlifting twice your body weight. And he was right. Once I broke 300, which didn't take very long. Well, that along with getting out of big, thick padded motion control shoes were the two things that really made the difference. And of course, I kept going. And once I hit 400 pounds, which was as much a psychological barrier as anything else, then things continue to get even better. And it's something that sprinters are very accustomed to. There's a line that speed is made in the weight room, which is not totally true, actually. But sprinters are known for spending time in the weight room. But distance runners or casual runners or hikers or walkers, are not. And but yes, it is amazing. Well, let me just ask it as a question. Given the fact that you know this, and it's not it's not a secret that strength training has these benefits. When you present this to people, I mean, they're obviously coming to you based on this. Before you had a reputation, let's say, when you'd be introducing this idea, what kind of response did you typically get?
Well, I got a lot of the responses that I myself had years and years ago, which were, why do I have to strength train? My legs are getting plenty of exercise already. Another big objection is, well, I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to put on muscle. I don't want to be muscle bound. I don't want to get tight and inflexible.
I love that.
And yeah, I mean, these, objections to strength training for distance runners are just fascinating to me because, it's almost like saying, someone's like, I don't want to put on all this weight because, I'm just going to all of a sudden become, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Right. I don't want to be a bodybuilder. Right. That's kind of like a bodybuilder saying, well, I was going to go for a 3-mile run a couple times a week, but I really don't want to become a sub 5 miler.
No, it's like them saying, I'd like to go for a little run, but I don't want to look like one of those marathoners who weighs 105 pounds. It's like,
right.
Yeah. I mean, it really is amazing to me. Well, there's two things that I find kind of funny. One is how human beings, we have this habit of when someone introduces something new, we immediately jump to some imagined worst case scenario that pretty much never happens. So my favorite is when I say something about running barefoot or walking around barefoot. People say, well, aren't you worried about stepping in dog crap? I go, when's the last time you did that? They go, I don't know, 20 years ago. I said, well, then why would you start now? What's going to change that you're going to close your eyes and follow a dog? But we're wired for this because if we didn't think of unforeseen or horrible negative consequences, we wouldn't have survived and passed on our stupid genes to our children way back when. So that's the first one, just the meta level that people tend to instantly jump to these imagined negative consequences. But it's my all-time favorite. I don't want to become huge and muscle bound. It's like, do you have any idea how much effort it takes to put on any muscle whatsoever?
It's so difficult. I mean, you have to eat a tremendous number of calories first.
Yeah.
And all the running that you're doing, let's also talk about that. All the running that you're doing is using all those calories you're eating.
Right.
So all those excess calories are not going to hypertrophy, building muscle. They're going towards actual energy expenditure of your running.
Right.
And so it's sort of like how bodybuilders really don't do much aerobic exercise because they don't want to be in a caloric hole. They don't want to exert a bunch of energy if it's not directly focused on building muscle. For runners, we've got to think the same way. We're not going to get big.
Yeah.
And the other big complaint that I have is, and I have this too, I'm a runner. I would rather be out there running than in the gym 100% of the time. But most runners say, I don't have the time for it. And I always counter with, look, we have to understand how strength training is so important that it is going to enable you to do the thing that you love, which is running. So strength train now so that you can do the thing you love, as opposed to only running. And then sooner or later, you're probably going to get hurt. And if you don't make a little time for these sorts of injury prevention strategies now, you're going to have to make a lot of time in the future for treating the inevitable injuries that occur.
Yeah, it's funny. People don't think of it, the long-term version of how much time they're actually running if they factor in the times where they're injured and not able to, and then factor in how much time they're taking off to do some strength training, which is nominal compared to how much time they're spending running. Again, human beings are just not good at understanding basic math or statistics in a way that impacts our own life. And we might think things like, well, yeah, that makes sense for you, but for me, it's a whole different game. I'm a special little snowflake, and that doesn't work for me, that even though it worked for you and the hundreds and thousands of people who've experienced the benefits of actually doing strength training. Back to your thing of, I run, I've got strong legs. What I find so fascinating is the number of runners who, they've got strong quads, they've got strong hamstrings, they've got crap glutes. They wouldn't know a glute if it hit them over the head, which would be a very interesting thing that I think you have to pay money to have happen. But it's I have on more than one occasion come up to a distance runner and put my finger in their gluteus maximus and said, flex that to push my finger out. And they're like, what? How do you do that? I went, yeah, you can't flex the muscle that's made for running. And that's usually a bit of a wake-up call. Or, sorry, I'll rant on this one for a sec. I was in the lab with Dr. Bill Sands, who was the head of biomechanics for the U.S. Olympic Committee for a while. And he said the people who come into his lab, typically Olympic level runners who are injured, he goes, without exception, they have weak glute medius. Without exception, every one of them. And that's a hugely important muscle for keeping your legs aligned properly to run well.
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, the whole glute complex is one of the largest muscle groups in the body, if not the largest muscle group in the body. And it's the muscle group that is most responsible for the power in your stride, for keeping your stride aligned well. If your glutes aren't working right and you're, not moving through that normal range of motion, or you have the proper flexibility, your stride's going to look a little wonky. And so, I think focusing on those runner specific areas of need, particularly the glutes. I think the hips are also very important. And, you mentioned this before, but just our modern sedentary lives really do not set us up for success here because, we spend a lot of the day sitting down. Our glutes are completely not in use. They're deactivated. They're just kind of sitting there doing nothing. And a lot of folks, especially you work a day job, you're sitting at a computer for most of the day, and then you might go running after work. Well, you've just conditioned your glutes to be asleep for 8, 9, 10 hours.
Right.
And then you're getting out and you're going for a run. And I see that as a big reason why runners are starting to get hurt, just because, you can't go from sedentary to doing a track workout or some sort of hill workout or a long run. You really need to prime the body for that. And so I think some smaller interventions that we can incorporate into runners training can really help with that specific issue. But in general, strength training, particularly, squats and deadlifts, the big compound multi-joint lifts, those are the lifts that we really want. They're movements, not training muscles. And I think that's what distance runners should be
it's interesting because,
on.
of course, those are the two exercises that terrify people the most. I mean, they're afraid if they're deadlifting, I'm going to do something to my back. They're afraid if they're squatting, just being under a load is scary for people until you kind of get into it, and then it becomes something else. So how do you God, I have so many questions. Wait, I'm going to put a note for this one. Getting people over the hump. But I'm going to come back to that. So I'm making a note so you don't have to. But so you had this realization that strength training was important. You started to integrate that. Just tell me how that evolved for you, like what you started doing, how that changed over time with what you learned and what you were seeing in your running. And then the next phase of that is going into, how you then started applying that into your coaching and sort of where coaching came into the mix on all of this.
Yeah. So when I first started, I didn't really have much lifting experience or anything like that, besides, getting into the weight room every couple months and just goofing around, really not knowing what I was doing and doing some bicep curls and, thinking I was getting jacked. But when I systematically introduced strength training into my own training, it was through this concept that I call sandwiching. And this was kind of like the entry level way of starting strength training on a very regular basis. And so what I did was I sandwiched every run between a dynamic warm up first and some form of runner specific strength or even core work. And so, we're not talking big workouts. We're not talking even gym workouts. This is 10, 20, maybe 25 minutes of mostly body weight exercises. Yeah, we might use a medicine ball or a kettlebell or some bands, some resistance bands. But this led me down this road of, number one, recognizing how important it was to prime the body for running, especially if it was a more difficult run. So that's the purpose of that dynamic warm-up. Prime the body for running. Let's get ready. But also there's a strength component to it as well.
Pause there, though. So can you say more for people who don't know what constitutes a dynamic workout and how that's different than what most people are used to for warming up, if they do any warming up or dynamic?
Right. So
that's different. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's say you're getting ready to go for a run after work. A lot of folks will just get on their clothes, they'll head out the door and they'll start shuffling around. And there really is no warm up before they go running. The beginning of their run, assuming they're starting a little bit slower, is the warm up itself. But a dynamic warm up is a little bit different. It's about 10 minutes or so, could be as low as 5 minutes of dynamic flexibility exercises and also some light strength work. So I might do a series of different types of lunges, which are great at waking up the glutes, making sure that you remember how to contract them and do that exercise properly. I think that exercise in particular is very helpful before you go running.
Yep.
And then, in addition to that, you might do some form drills. We might do some leg swings, a bunch of exercises to simply improve range of motion and really do all the things a warm up should do. So if we're sitting around doing a bunch of static stretching, just touching our toes, that's not actually warming you up. I literally want you to warm up during the warm up. Let's increase our respiration. Let's increase our heart rate. Let's lubricate our joints, improve our range of motion, open up capillary beds, especially in our extremities. A warm up does a lot of things that we really, really want right before we go running. And then as soon as you finish your run, then the core or strength work can start. And a lot of folks are like, can I do it later in the day? Yes, it's fine. As long as you're getting it in sometime, then that's goal number one. But this is simply a body weight routine. Maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's 20 minutes. We're going to do a lot of fundamental exercises, push-ups, planks, lunges, body weight squats, body weight deadlifts, and single leg deadlifts, planks. Might have mentioned that already. But there's so many different body weight exercises that we can do. And I've put together a bunch of routines that are specific for different areas. So I have the standard core routine that I think is a bread and butter core workout for runners, the ITB rehab routine. These are all in the Strength Running blog, but that I should have named it better. Poor branding on my part, because it's really a hip and glute oriented strength workout. It's not just for someone who might have IT band syndrome. And these exercise routines focus on some of the areas of big need among runners, the glutes, the core region. We're not sitting around doing a bunch of bicep curls or tricep extensions, but we're really focusing on those areas that are helpful for runners. Open up your range of motion, give you strength. But then also what this does that a lot of people don't recognize is that it's a very nice cool down after a run. Because I'm sure everyone has that feeling of, you just finished a big run, you get in your house, you sit down in a chair, you get distracted by your phone for maybe a half an hour. And then you get up from that chair. How do you feel? You feel terrible. And what the core or strength workout does is put you through a whole variety of other movements that really help cool you down. So by going, outside of the normal range of motion of running, you're going to be doing leg swings. You're going to be doing all kinds of different stuff. And throughout the rest of the day, you're just going to feel better. You're going to feel looser. You're going to feel a little bit more athletic. You're not going to feel so tight, like you've just, run a marathon the day before and your legs can barely move. So there's a lot of really great things to like about, this whole sandwich method when we're sandwiching our run in between there. And I think it's just a helpful framework for runners to understand that you are not just a runner. You are an athlete that specializes in running. So that means we are not just going to be running. We're going to be doing the dynamic flexibility work. We're going to be doing the core and strength work. We're going to be doing form drills. We're going to be doing all kinds of stuff. That's going to make you more athletic, more coordinated, and that's going to make you into a better runner. Now, that's kind of the entry level approach to strength training. We're going to be doing a little bit before our run. Then we're going to be doing some body weight stuff after our run. But if you wanted to get into what I would consider ideal strength training for endurance runners, it would be exactly that. But twice a week, you would get into the gym and you would actually do legitimate weightlifting where you're going to be using a barbell. You're going to be putting up some heavy weight, relatively speaking, and you're going to really be working on strength and power, not necessarily lifting for endurance with a ton of sets and reps, or even lifting for hypertrophy like a bodybuilder will. You're not going to be in the gym for 2.5 hours. You're not going to be in the gym 5 or 6 days a week. We don't need that as endurance runners, but twice a week, focusing on mostly strength, mostly power. That is just going to make you more economical. It's going to give you a faster finishing kick at the end of a race because you can recruit more of those muscle fibers for more power. And it's going to reduce your injury risk, all things that most runners want. So I try to logically sell strength training to runners because it allows you to do what you love and it allows you to do it much more effectively. So I think there's so much to love about strength training. And I'm sure you can tell I'm getting excited. I talk about strength training. And I'm like, yes, it makes us faster, it makes us stronger. It improves our body composition. We might look better naked. This is great.
So can you say a little more about what a workout that focuses on strength and or power might look like so people get a sense of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, let's talk ideal scenario here.
Sure.
Our weightlifting should be roughly periodized, kind of like our running is. So if we're getting ready for a big goal race, our weightlifting should look different 12 weeks out from that race or just a week out from that race. So with the understanding that no workout's going to look exactly the same, I think generally speaking, weightlifting can move from sort of like running. You have your early base training in a typical training plan. In weightlifting, that might be 3 sets of 10. You're really just practicing the movement. You're building general strength. You're getting comfortable with the implements, and you're kind of just building that general competence under the bar and in the weight room. And then over time, those workouts become a little bit more power oriented. So you might move into some Olympic lifts. You might start doing some more power oriented, explosive exercises. We'll start layering in some plyometrics as well. And that's almost like a more running specific way of expressing the power or the strength that you have. And that really is sort of like the icing on the cake. And that really helps runners. Not only are you, getting strong, building the power, but then the plyometrics really help you express that power and really work on your efficiency and economy. So, the workouts might be very different. We might move from 3 sets of 10 working on squats and deadlifts to, doing some more advanced types of squats and deadlifts, doing maybe an overhead squat. Overhead squat's much more difficult than a normal squat. We might also move into doing a power clean or a snatch, the types of exercises where you are really combining strength and speed, because that's what power really is. It's strength and speed.
Yep.
Strength expressed quickly. And so these exercises have great carryover to running because, what are we trying to do as runners? We're trying to move quickly, and we are trying to hit that ground really hard with every foot strike that we're having because, that's force. You're going to impart more force into the ground. Your legs are then going to be strong enough to, isometrically hold on to some of that force, and then you'll release it in the stride. And that makes us faster runners. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I think about strength training for runners in the weight room, with the understanding that I'm not a strength coach. I've just talked to a lot of different high-level strength coaches who work with some elite runners and program this kind of weightlifting.
You mentioned 2 things. One just now is that you want to hit the ground with as much force as you can, which is counterintuitive for many people because they think, well, running already hurts. And so I don't want to have more force. I don't want, things that hurt. And we also talked about doing form drills. And one of the things that obviously keeps people from maximizing the strength that they have, whether they've been in the weight room or not, is form issues. And so, the biggest one, I'm going to throw it out there, being overstriding. If you're landing with your foot too far in front of your body, A, you're putting on the brakes every time you land. B, you are putting force through your joints. C, when your foot's in front of you and you're starting to pull the ground underneath you, that's when your glutes and hamstrings are in the weakest position. So you're setting yourself up for more likelihood of that kind of injury, let alone other injuries that happen when you're overstriding, which includes shin splints and plantar fasciitis as well. So talk about the kind of relationship, other than what I just said, between form and form drills per se, for example, and strength.
Yeah. So form drills are very exaggerated running motions. And there's a lot of different theories about form drills. A lot of coaches will say, well, they don't actually improve your form, but it's a great warm up. So we do them anyway.
Yeah, they're
and
wrong.
Some coaches will say the opposite. They help you warm up, but they're also improving your form too. I kind of take a hybrid view. I think that changing your form is a challenging thing to do because we're all sort of neurally wired to move in a certain way. But that doesn't mean that we're all...
I got to pause on that one.
Okay.
Because this is an argument that I had with the son of a Canadian running researcher. The researcher, his name is Ben O'Nig, and his son Sandro. And I had this argument with him because I was on a panel discussion at the American College of Sports Medicine where a guy from Brooks and a guy from Medius both quoted Benno as saying, everyone has their own preferred movement pattern and it's very hard to change. And I said to Sandro, that's completely ridiculous. If you're in the same basic shoe over and over and over, then nothing's going to change. But if you radically change the conditions that you're running in, if you change the surface that you're running on, if you change the biggest one, of course, is shoes. If you take off your shoes, it's going to change effortlessly. I mean, I watched it in the lab. You take people who've never run barefoot in their life, you take off their shoes and make them run barefoot, and 90% of them, without any intervention, immediately change their stride. And the other 10%, you can give them the world's simplest cue, and they will as well. And Sandro stopped because my dad never said that, nothing changes. Clearly, if you switch to barefoot or a truly minimalist shoe, things are going to change. But what he's pointing out is that basically most shoes are the same. So changing it without getting The feedback is very, very difficult. But if you change the feedback, which you do by taking off your shoes, for example, it couldn't be more effortless to change something which may in fact lead to a permanent change once you put shoes back on, once you discover what the effect is. I'm not trying to promote barefoot in this moment, but just pointing out that so yeah, you'll have to bear with me. My undergraduate research at Duke was on cognitive aspects of motor skill acquisition. So my whole thing is how you actually learn to move differently. Effortless if you do it the right way, impossible if you don't have the right feedback.
Yeah. And I think my point is that most runners don't give themselves the opportunity to get that feedback. So in practice, in reality, it is very difficult for most runners to actually do this.
With that caveat, yes.
And I think, the best way to change your form is to change your training. It's through shoes. It's through the workouts you're doing. It's through the form drills you're doing. It's on the terrain that you're running on. And I think variety here is really important. I'm not going to have runners run trails 100% of the time, even though I think trail running is a wonderful way of subtly improving your form over time because it requires more coordination and athleticism, and it's harder to overstride, and all sorts of things are really helpful with that. Now, form drills, going back to form drills, I think can be really helpful in reinforcing certain motor patterns, like landing directly underneath your body as opposed to reaching out in front of you. That is a very common form mistake that runners have because, the thinking goes, I want a long stride, and that's a good thing. A long stride is good, but you don't get it by reaching out in front of you. You actually get it by putting your foot down underneath you, exerting a lot of force against the ground, and then all that length of stride that you have is mostly behind you. It's in that huge trail leg coming back up. And so form drills can reinforce some of those really good movement patterns. But I think ultimately it really has to come from the training that you're doing. And so I work with a lot of recreational adult runners, and not only are they not doing any form drills, but they're not really running fast almost ever. And I think running fast is one of the best ways to improve your form. Now, of course, you have to do it gradually and safely and all the caveats here, but simply learning how to sprint is probably one of the best things that you can do to improve your form.
It's a really interesting one because I see people on the track often. Well, there's two things about sprinting. One is, just for the sake of sort of obviousness, if you're running as fast as you can, that doesn't necessarily mean you're sprinting. That's a whole other thing about energy systems, et cetera. But the biggest thing that I see is people who are running slowly and then who decide to start doing speed workouts. They start trying to do sprinting. Many times they're actually just doing the exact same thing they're doing slowly, slightly faster. And if you are going to be making that change, I agree with you. I mean, to sprint effectively and efficiently is the only way you can do that is by running better, by having better form. But I often find that I watch people on the track, and it's like they get to a certain point where things often get worse because, like you said, they think that to get faster, you need to reach out further, you need to pull the ground more, you need to do all these various things that are the antithesis of what it takes to actually sprint. And I think I would argue that because many endurance runners aren't truly sprinters, I'll say it that way. Like one of my best friends, he's a world champion cross-country runner. He can run 30-second, 200-meter runs like all day, every day, just same pace, never changes. He can't go any faster. I mean, that's all he does. And you get a sprinter and, I can do that in 23, 24 seconds, and then I'm done. And people don't get the difference that, that 6 seconds, that 20% difference is massive. So anyway, I guess that was the long version of my saying for people who I don't want people to take this part of the conversation and go start sprinting without getting some kind of feedback about what sprinting form actually is, which is running form. It's no different. But if they think that it's just moving their legs faster rather than getting their feet underneath them properly, then they're going to setting themselves up for potentially more problems.
Right. And I think sprinting is uniquely challenging because exactly what you just said. So many runners think that it's simply faster, slower running, but It's not. It's a different type of form. And I think it's specifically difficult because, number one, the stride rate or cadence that you have when you're running really fast is almost foreign to a lot of runners. They never move their body that quickly. And so that is almost a neural demand that most runners, fail to wrap their head around.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it too is that you don't really realize how strong you have to be to run fast, to sprint, to actually have a high maximum velocity, to actually hit that top speed and to be going at a really strong clip. And so, that's not really a fitness issue in the way that endurance runners think about fitness.
Right.
This is really strength and coordination.
Yeah.
Strength and coordination are not things that runners typically work on. And so when I think about form drills, I think about we are generally working on coordination. We are generally working on athleticism. I mean, it's a little bit specific to running, of course, because it's these exaggerated motions. But, how do you become a strong, efficient runner who can sprint? I think you need to sprint.
Yeah.
You need to practice that. I think you need to lift weights. That's going to make you stronger. And I think there needs to be this element of play in your training where you are frequently running very, very fast, but in a way that's not difficult. And so that's an important concept because a lot of runners equate fast with difficult.
Right.
But we don't necessarily have to make all of our fast running very difficult. And I think one of the best examples of this are hill sprints or strides. Now, they're very different. A hill sprint is 8 to 10 seconds, maximum effort, as hard as you can go up a really steep hill. And you give yourself maybe a minute or two of just nothing. You're walking around, you're not running at all in between. You're letting your heart rate come down. This is like a sprinter's workout, which most runners, distance runners, are allergic to. We don't understand. You're like, what do you mean? The recovery isn't a jog? But no, you let yourself fully come down from that 8 to 10 second effort. And then you go again. You only might do 4 to 10 of these repetitions. And the other thing is strides. Strides are basically accelerations. You might accelerate to about 95, 98% of your maximum speed, but that's it. It's a controlled sprint. That's what I like to call a controlled sprint.
Yeah.
And then you get another minute or two of just walking around in between. And so, you're building to that 95, 98% max. You're only holding it for a second or two, and then you're going to coast down to a stop. It's not difficult. It is just a fun way for you to play with speed after an easy run. And runners who do this a couple days a week, year after year after year, get really good at running fast and being able to tap into those higher gears because they're just much more comfortable at it. They have experience doing it and, it's not foreign to them. And so, I think if we separate hard and fast and work on running fast without making it hard, that bridges this kind of sedentary to sprinter thing that we're talking about here.
The comfort thing is really interesting. You gave me a flashback. When I got back into sprinting after a 30-year break, I was 45. And it took me 2 years till I felt comfortable going all out. And, I was a little nervous. And since our brains don't know how old our bodies are, at first, I tried to override what my body was saying, which is, why don't you just take a fucking break? And instead, it's like, I can do one more. And that was the one where I would get hurt. But the biggest thing is that even when I was doing that, I was afraid to go all out. And I almost can remember the exact workout when it's like, no, I can do that now. And now I haven't had a real injury in 11 years. But if I get like a little niggly something, that's what I look for is when do I feel comfortable going all out? That's the way I gauge things. And I think people are often unwilling to go through that learning phase and the time that it takes until you get comfortable with some very new thing, which what we're talking now, sprinting training is a very new thing for most people. They've never thought to run as fast as they can unless they're running away from or running to something for, just a couple of strides.
Yeah. And I think for distance runners, we never really do this too much in our training. And really in all of our races, unless we're running a 5K or a 10K or something shorter than that, in a half marathon, we're never running as fast as we can. Even at the very end, when we're trying to, we're not even close. Now, in some of the shorter races, you can get pretty close to your max speed for maybe the final 50 meters or 100 meters.
Yeah.
And, that is our entire experience of running as fast as we can. But really, that is not maximal velocity. That is not top speed kind of training. And so if we start incorporating some speed development work into our training, it becomes a lot easier to sprint and we develop that coordination and we get much more comfortable with it.
There's also just this sort of neurological thing where what you get used to feels familiar, feels comfortable, and trying to step out from any of that. I think people misinterpret the feeling of laying down new neural pathways. So when you're in a groove, and it's literally a neural groove, when you try to do something different, it feels awkward, it feels frustrating, it feels weird, and most people seem to forget that that's how learning happens, and that's the experience of learning, not the experience of telling you, hey, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a new experience, and that's new, and nobody likes to learn new things. It is uncomfortable. It's frustrating. And especially for adults, when we're kids, when we're teenagers, we're always learning new things. It is just our modus operandi, how we operate. And if we got a little bit more curious about speed, about what our bodies can do, I think it would be much easier for us to go down this road and eventually learn some of these things. And I think one of the most fascinating aspects of speed, and I know you're going to be able to speak to this, Steven, is when you get really good at it, when you become competent, the speed fluency that you have is almost like your vocabulary has increased. Now you understand the difference between 99.9% effort and 100% effort, but also 99, 98.5, 98%. And so you just have much more levels of effort and of speed. It's almost like you're going from an 8-speed car to a 12-speed car. You're just getting all these extra gears, and you're better understanding them. You know how they affect your body. You only get there through a lot of practice and a lot of familiarity with it.
And that's the advantage to sprinting, is that you can get more experience of those specific things to be able to track them better. So, when you're only running 50 meters or 100 meters at different paces, you can get more of that in, so you start to understand what that is. And most distance runners don't. Most distance runners don't even have that within their own vocabulary and of course there's the other level, which is competition speed. No one's ever set a personal best in the 100 meters in practice. It only happens in competition. I said to someone, I can train all day and maybe I'll be a little sore for a couple of days, but I go to a meet, I do one race and I'm toast for a week. There's such a different phenomenon, both biochemically and neurologically, from competing. And a lot of people don't give themselves that opportunity to discover what that feels like as well, or do enough of it to really build, like you said, build the vocabulary of what those different things are.
Yeah, what you're talking about right now is fascinating, because you're basically saying that racing is a skill. And I could not agree more. It is a very difficult thing, because it's a maximum effort. Maybe that's over 50 meters, 100 meters,
doesn't matter.
100 miles, no matter what the race distance is, it is a skill. And I think that is a big issue that I'm trying to address as a coach. And I know I'm frequently talking about this in ways that, I want to get runners sort of away from the marathon. I love the marathon. It's wonderful. A lot of runners have big, hairy, audacious goals with the marathon, but they don't realize that they could accomplish those goals if they stepped away from the marathon and got more race experience.
Right.
Now, you can't run too many marathons. You can't have a bad marathon this weekend and be like, I'll try again next week. You can't do that. This isn't like a 5K. A 5K, you can try again next week.
Right.
Your body will recover enough. You could still do a midweek workout and then come right back and have your vengeance on the 5K. But if you don't give yourself those opportunities, and if you're only focusing on the really long races, you just don't practice that skill of racing. So I'm a big proponent of runners doing the middle distance events frequently. Let's try to find some track races, 800, mile, 2 mile, 5K, 8K, 6K, 10K. I don't care what the distance is, but make it short so that you can run these races more frequently. You will more frequently practice the skill of racing, but you also more frequently get into a situation where you're trying to run as fast as you can. And that is a valuable skill to practice.
Well, and there's another aspect to the racing skill that's a whole other universe, which is I don't want to call it the psychological part. Let's just call it the thinking part. And the thinking part for me, and I'm going to ask if this is true for you as well, for a sprinter, the most difficult thing for me to learn was I'll say it this way, how to stay in my lane. I don't mean that literally. I mean metaphorically. Like, I've got a guy I can hear him coming up on my shoulder. How do I not change what I'm doing based on that? Or there's a guy who's an inch ahead of me. How do I not try to outrun him and stay in what I do? Because if I start to compete with the guys left or right of me, or, all the way to left or all the way right, then I'm probably going to be changing my form into some way that's less efficient and learning how to just run my race. And it sounds crazy. I'm talking about, 12 seconds, but, or in a 60 meters, 8 seconds. But in all that time, there are a seemingly infinite number of opportunities to step out of my race and screw up my race.
Yeah, that happens in distance running too, where I think it's a little different because you do need to respond a little bit better to your competitors just because you're out there for longer. You can't let them get too far ahead of you. But it definitely is something that runners have to practice over time. And I think the mental component of it is really difficult. And even, I was 10 years into my running career, running so many races every year, but every single season, the beginning of the season, I was a mental basket case for my first race because I hadn't raced in 3 months or so. Right. But then by the end of the year, the end of the season, when I'd been racing maybe once a week, or in high school, it was like 2 times or maybe even 3 times a week, you just get into this groove where I know psychologically what my body can do. I know what this is going to feel like. I know that my body is going to feel like homeostasis is under threat, but it is not actually under threat. I'm going to make it. I'm going to live. And so because of that, I'm not going to stress out as much. I'm not going to have all this anxiety. And I'm going to feel a little bit more confident to dig down deeper and try to sprint harder at the end of a race. Because the whole mental thing is like, it either makes or breaks you as an athlete.
Well, it's so interesting because I think there are parts of let's call it the mental game, for lack of a better term, that are legit, and there are parts that are mythologized, like, being in the zone. I'm putting giant air quotes around that. I won't mention this person by name. I won't even mention the gender, but this is a world champion and Olympic marathoner who someone asked while a bunch of us were having dinner about them getting in the zone. And there was this long conversation about getting in the zone and how they got in the zone and what they did in the zone and how the zone felt. And after like 20 minutes of this, I said, did you ever have a race where you were in the zone and you lost? And they said, yeah. I said, ever have a race where you felt like crap, like maybe you even had the flu and you won? And they said, yeah. I said, well, there's that in the zone crap. It's like, congratulations, you had a good feeling on some races and didn't have that feeling on other races. But keep in mind, you were a world champion. You were better than everybody else by a long shot. It didn't matter how you felt. It didn't matter what you thought. So that's sort of like the macro level thing. But then there's the more micro level thing, which is the part that I find most interesting that you brought up, of the getting the information from your body and reframing it, or ignoring it, or listening to it as appropriate. And there's different times and different places that you want to do each one of those. But the reframing is the one I find the most interesting, because there's parts of your brain that are telling you, you got to stop this right now. And you learn, I don't need to pay attention to that one. It's lying to me.
Right. And, I remember maybe only a handful of races in my entire 20 plus years of running where I felt like I was in the zone. Mm-hmm. And I certainly had a lot of good races where I had a great race and I felt like crap from start to finish. The fastest mile I ever ran, when I ran my 4:33, I felt like crap from 200 meters into that race. And I think that's the difference between a highly trained athlete and someone who might not be highly trained. How you perform is not necessarily dependent on how you feel. Right. Although how you feel can help you improve or run a little bit better. I don't think it's going to hurt you in any way. I just don't think it's always a helpful thing. And so, when you get into the zone and just have that experience, at least for me, it was almost like my body was telling me that it had to stop. You are so uncomfortable right now with this race-related fatigue and soreness and pain. And the way I reframed it in my head was, well, good. That means it's working.
Nice.
And so is this almost like, masochistic kind of reframing it, where I wanted to experience more pain because that meant I was running faster.
I think you nailed it. I mean, the number of times, my line is, what do I care what I think about me? The number of times you have some thought that is just so not accurate. Or I was talking to someone about this, the whole reframing concept. I said, okay, imagine you have a big headache and, you just want to get rid of it. Well, what if you grew up in a culture where that particular pain you're experiencing was the sign of your inevitable and almost imminent awakening, that you were going to become enlightened, and that was the sign, what would you then do? It's like, oh, I would try to make it happen more. I would try to be like really diving in there, like be super excited that I got this headache. It's like, now that's couldn't be a simpler thought experiment, but it should make you question a whole lot of what happens inside your brain that you pay attention to.
Yeah, I don't really trust everything I feel and think all the time.
It's a good place to live. So we got to start to bring this to a close. I want to ask you, I don't know which question I want to do first. So I'll do the one that popped in my head. So if you could like debunk to the point of eliminating from the planet some thought about running and or strength, what thought that people seem to have would you like to eradicate from the face of the earth?
I would definitely like to get rid of the idea that runners don't have to do any strength training. I'd like to get rid of the idea that strength training is going to bulk runners up. And I think those two things are the biggest barriers that prevent runners from getting into any strength training, because it's really such an important part of training that, Steven, I don't even consider it cross training.
Yeah.
So, I write a lot of custom training plans for runners, and I have a little question about cross training. What kind of cross training do you do? And they'll tell me, oh, I do a lot of strength training. I'm like, that's not cross training.
That's just what you do for running.
Yeah, that is part of the training you have to do if you'd like to reach your potential as a runner. If you'd like to stay healthy, if you'd like to be able to run really fast and be more economical, you've got to do some strength training. Now, do you have to do the elliptical? No, you don't have to do the elliptical at all if you don't want to as a runner. But does it have a place in your training for cross training? Sure, we can program it in there. And so that is cross training. Cross training is what you replace running with if you're injured, or if you'd like to do more running, but you're very injury prone and you can't just get up to 100 miles a week. Okay, let's layer in a lot of cross training. It'll help bridge that gap. But too many runners think that strength training is a nice to do, whereas I consider it a must do if you love the sport and want to continue improving. So those are the big things with regard to strength training, and particularly with women. I coach a lot of women. I would love to see more women get into strength training and kind of forget that bulky, I'm going to gain a bunch of weight idea. Because, the truth of the matter is that, all those, Instagram models and the people in the bathing suits who make their income by posting butt pictures on Instagram, all those
Photoshop.
Yeah. But they're also lifting weights too. Like, these are not, models are not looking like that by simply running. They are looking like that.
Salad.
Yeah. By lifting weights and really sculpting their body. And so, it is such an integral part of not just training and performance, but also for health. And I've been talking to runners more about just longevity. You want to be running when you're 50, 60, 70, you better start lifting weights when you're 30 and 40, because that's going to enable you. Again, it comes back to enabling you to do the thing that you love, especially long term.
To be clear, never too late.
Never too late.
And, there's sort of a caveat to what you were saying. I'm just going to say it rather than ask you a question that might lead you to it, which is that one of the things that's so interesting about this whole idea of including strength training this way and thinking about form as a function of strength and vice versa is that for people who think they can't run, and I'm not suggesting everyone run. If it's not fun for you, don't do it. But if you think I can't run because, that's the one that I'd like to get rid of. Because again, if you want to, there's nothing preventing you from doing it. And when people say, oh, I can't run because I have bad knees, like, no, you have bad knees because you ran badly and you weren't strong. So you had bad form and you weren't strong. If you fix either of those or both of those, you can run. Or I can't run because I'm really overweight. Completely irrelevant. In fact, you're starting out stronger than the person who weighs half as much as you, because you got strong enough to carry your body weight around. And I did a podcast episode with Heather Vincent, who one of her big focuses is overweight runners. She goes, they tend to have better form than regular runners because they have no option. They can't run badly.
I like that.
It was brilliant. And so, that's the other one. And again, and you can extrapolate this, take it out of the context of running to anything. If you learn the right way to do it, if you build the strength and able to do it, then you're never going to become, not necessarily going to become an Olympian, but you can maximize your body's ability to do that thing. And it amazes me that people seem to have this idea that as you get older, you just can't do it at all. Not that you can't do it as well, but at all. I mean, I'm going to turn 59 in a couple of weeks. And I know that, shit and fan are going to collide in terms of my speed in a relatively short amount of time, because that's just statistical. Once sprinters hit about 60, you get slower, and then it continues. I was at the senior games talking to a bunch of 6-year-olds. I was just turned 50. And they were all talking about how much slower they got when they turned 60. And a couple of 80-year-olds walked up and went, "You have no idea what you're talking about." But the important part is we were all still out there doing it and enjoying it as best as we were able to. And there's no reason that people can't do that with the right combination of form and strength.
Yeah, I love that. And really what you're talking about is a growth mindset. Do you think that you can start something and improve and get better at it? Because if you think, I can never run because XYZ, well, then you're going to stay at whatever level that you're at for the foreseeable future. But if you think you can grow, if you think you can change and improve, then you definitely can, because the resources out there to help runners, I think right now, this is like a golden time for runners with the amount of information available, the amount of, coaching that's even available because of the internet. Now, any Joe jogger can go get a running coach. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. I think that is truly incredible that any runner can go get a running coach. And it's not just the purview of, the elite athlete or the sponsored runner who, their shoe company is providing that coach. No, this is something that is much more accessible for runners today. So if anybody wants to do it, the resources are there to help you do that.
Well, that couldn't have been a better segue to me asking, will you tell people how they can get in touch with you and find out more about what you're doing, whether they choose to work with you as a coach or just learn the things you're doing? Let them know how to make that happen.
Well, sure. I'm the strength running guy. So if you go to strengthrunning.com, you'll find we have a blog. Our podcast has really been growing over the last couple of years. So if you wanted to check out the Strength Running podcast, has such amazing guests like our host today here, had you on a couple months ago.
True.
And find me on social media. I'm at Jason Fitz1 on Twitter and Instagram. I'd be happy to connect with any of your listeners and talk about strength training or form or drills or whatever is on their mind. My whole shtick is let's get adult runners training more strategically, sort of like elite runners. We're going to take a lot of lessons and principles from them, but adapt it to the average recreational runner like me, so that we can actually get a lot of value from that and hopefully train more strategically, train a little bit more methodically so that we can accomplish our goals. So awesome. Find me at Strength Running. My contact info is right there on the site. I don't hide it, and I'd be happy to hear from anybody.
Beautiful. Jason Fitzgerald, thank you so much. A pleasure as always. And clearly you and I could have this conversation for hours and hours and hours and not get to an end. And one day, I was going to say something about running together, but I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I have like dealers who will call and say, "Hey, why don't you come out to our shop and then go for a run?" I go, "Yeah, I don't do that." They go, "No, just like 2 or 3 miles." I went, "Yeah, I don't do that." They go, "Come on, just a little." All right. Why don't we start on the track and you run a 12-second 100 with me, and then we'll go out and do a couple of miles. They went, "Oh yeah, I can't do that." I went, "Yeah, now you got it." So that means we'll just have to get together for something other than running together. Since if you're in sprinting mode, because since that's part of your training, we can come out and have some fun doing that. But that distance thing, I can't do it.
Well, I'll run a couple sprints with you if you'll run a couple miles with me.
Well, then we're just going to have dinner together.
That sounds good too. Maybe we can have some wine.
Perfect. Well, so for everybody else, thank you so much for being here. Again, just head over to www.jointhemovementmovement.com. Find the previous episodes, subscribe so you can hear about upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or feedback, if there's anyone you think should be on this show to have this conversation about moving naturally, drop me an email for anything at move@jointhemovementmovement.com. But most importantly, go out, have fun, and live life feet first.